G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for today's episode of Waffle Watch, covering a tight contest between the Waffle Eagles and Perth Demons at Mineral Resources Park, which I feel compelled to add, the venue, Mineral Resources Park, hosted an absolute blockbuster national carnival match between WA and Vic Country earlier in the morning. I only caught the final quarter while I was on the treadmill. I was looking for something to watch while I was getting that exercise in, but it ended with an unbelievable finish for WA getting a goal just before the siren sounded to win. And also just on that, before I get started, I'd actually love to hear in the comments how everybody else tuning in today likes to listen to or watch these videos. For me personally, like I just mentioned, I'll watch YouTube videos on the treadmill, but I'll also listen to podcasts with the earphones in just while I'm doing like DIY around the house or just jobs that I need to get done that don't require me to use my mind. So I'm really just intrigued about everyone who tunes into this channel. Just paint me a picture of what it looks like to take in content like these videos. Is it something that helps you unwind at the end of the day, just sitting down, or do these videos make your car ride more pleasant? Or like me, do you do it when you're trying to get your exercise in or jobs around the house with earpods in? I'd just love to know. It's not part of any marketing or research or anything like that. It's a genuine curiosity. But anyway, getting back to the program, for today's Waffle Watch, I'll be starting with a brief overview of the match, including some interesting positional observations that I made. Who was in our best players, including strong performers from the Waffle listed players, which I am going to try and make an effort to include in these reviews. My key takeaways from the match, and then as always, my predictions for who is pressing for a spot in the AFL side and what changes may come about next weekend. So beginning with the match overview, there are a few repeating trends that I've started to notice watching the Waffle Eagles. Basically, what quarters we perform and what we don't. The game started really close. And for the first half, what my eyes were telling me personally was that our weight of talent looked like it would be too much for the Perth Demons. Even though a lot of their ball movement did look consistently more effective than ours, which is something I put down to just the consistency that a designated Waffle League squad gets, and I think is a key difference between them and an AFL reserve side, even though we're the only AFL reserve side in WA for me to make these guesses on, these conclusions. In the third quarter, unfortunately, Perth put us away, pretty much hitting the scoreboard successively during that period. And for us, that just put us out of reach before I think we did put in a reasonably strong final quarter. But those second half fade outs, I have noticed, is a regular trend, which is what I was talking about. And it really surprised me more earlier in the season when I think my assumption was that with a side that's got AFL listed players in the squad, fitness would be one of our strengths, even if our squad balance isn't quite as tailored to, I suppose, winning the way that Waffle sides are, just because they don't have to play guys out of position because every AFL player needs to be in the side, even if, there's 20 forwards and 3 midfielders. That's an exaggeration, but just trying to get you to understand what I'm saying. That assumption that we'd run out games better was just purely based on the fact that AFL listed players have more training sessions every week and it's their full time job, so you'd expect the fitness to be higher. What I'm starting to realise though now is that the Waffle Eagles appear to deload a few guys every week, whether it's part of like a rehab program or because we're trying to train guys up in different positions, like, for instance, Bailey Williams in the forward line, even though he's dominant in the ruck at Waffle level, or just because we're worried about our emergencies before an AFL game. I know that I've heard Andrew McWalter mention in the past that we've pulled our emergencies out of the Waffle at three-quarter time or after three quarters, I think just to protect, the longevity if they have to get a call up. It is a factor that I'm guessing could be responsible for those second half trends that I'm noticing. And it's a bit of a shame because for me, I am personally invested in seeing the Waffle side start winning, especially after such a rough few years that I had purely put down to our injury crisis. But other than that, for the game, a couple of former Geelong Cats in Brandon Parfitt and Charlie Constable led the Demons all day, which did start off a lot of that impressive ball movement. And ultimately, over the course of the 4 quarters, they were too much. Which does bring me to our best players though. And Clay Hall was our standout performer by an absolute mile today. I know last week there were probably 3 guys that I said had their noses in a photo finish, but Hall was up the top by quite a bit. Not just because he consistently gets the best numbers for possession, clearances, and tackles every week, which he does. But because of the impact he had whenever he got his hands on the ball today, which did appear to have gone up significantly this week compared to previous weeks, he just looks like he's found a gear where he improves the situation on the ground with ease every time he gets near it. And I know I've been banging on about him playing in the AFL all year, but I'm going to go out and say it now. He may have had more disposals and 2 goals last week, but I expect that after the performance and dominance in today's match, he will be in the side against Carlton next week. So it's not so much me petitioning. It's actually, I'd say there's a pretty strong prediction there. So there's a little spoiler alert for the end of this episode. Tom Gross was right up there for second best for me. I know the commentators, I did hear them focus on a couple of small errors that he made, but he had really clean hands on the inside all day and opened up the field with a lot of smart plays. He's got a bit of mongrel in him too, which I think is such a good sign for a first-year player. He finished with 23 disposals, which was the second most on the ground, and I thought he was really impressive. Third best for me was actually Malachi Champion. It's sometimes hard to place deep forwards in the rankings unless they kick a bag, but he managed to actually nail multiple players, opponents today holding the ball, which doesn't happen that often in general, let alone from one guy. So his game sense is very high, and I thought it was really on show today. I mentioned earlier in the season that he's got a bit of Willy Rioli about his play style. I think just with his decision making in split seconds, and he did have a lot of clever things like that up the ground with the 12 possessions that he got, and he also did get a goal on top of that. But yeah, he's right up there for me today. But it is very hard to place small forwards when it's not all about how many goals they've kicked or goal assists even. Luca Grego also had one of his best games in the last month at least. I think a bit like Gross, his hands were really impressive in the contest. It is a shame that Waffle doesn't actually break down individual stats if you look through them on their website like that. But a lot of Grego's possessions were, those conversions from a loose contested ball to a running teammate. So I'd love to know how many contested possessions he did take. And he's looked the closest he has all year to the AFL standard. I'm not saying that he'll be able to barge his way into the side anytime soon, but the first step, especially for first-year players, is seeing those signs of what they'd look like if we did call on them, which at the moment we're not pressed to be calling on guys that are still learning and still developing. But if they did, you could see that he's probably starting to reach that stage where you could if you needed to. Otherwise, again, I thought Rhett Bazzo stood out in the back line with his athleticism, composure, and his skills. He ended with 16 disposals, but he just never looks vulnerable to the pressure of the opposition forwards just trying to keep it in their forward 50. He's a very clean and easy ball mover. He just looks like he's a little gear above the Waffle opponents that he plays on, which is a really key factor if you're going to make the AFL sides. From our Waffle listed players, there was actually just over a handful of them today I think there were 16 AFL listed players in the side. And I thought the best performance came from Thomas Edwards Baldwin. He had a lot of the footy, not unlike Harley Sparks as well, who gets a lot every week. But he had a few blistering moments that really impressed, including there was one clearance from a throw-in that ripped the pack apart, really opened up the ground. So, like I said, Harley Sparks managed to get a heap of it as well, like he does every week. And the co-captains, Shannon Lucassen and Jack Eastoff, both had really good games with decent numbers for the field positions that they're placed in. And they were just really reliable when they did have it, which pretty much covers all of our best players from the AFL and Waffle listed squad, which brings me to the key takeaway for today's loss. And that is that I don't think the WAFC has to live in fear of West Coast becoming a juggernaut of the Waffle if they were to allow some reasonable concessions for the club to pay for non-AFL talent. As I went into detail for my Waffle review, I think it was the West Coast versus West Perth match, if you're really curious to go back and find that one. There are a few really big options that the Eagles could take permanently to establish themselves in the state league and at state level. But most importantly, my key takeaway for today is that I just think it's clear the Waffle side doesn't cater to our plans for guys in the AFL over winning, which I think is why East Perth chose to end their affiliation with us before when we started our own team. And ultimately, you do have to take that into consideration because I just don't think it's necessary for the WAFC to keep additional limitations on us compared to the other sides in the league just to avoid creating a juggernaut. It's quite clear that we will do things that are in the best interest of individual players that are, aspiring to make a big contribution at AFL level over potentially even key moments where the game could be won in the waffle. And that alone should be enough to, I think, balance things out without clipping our wings and not allowing us access to guys outside of our AFL list very easily. But anyway, that pretty much covers it for everything but the predictions for the AFL squad next week. And at number one, as I mentioned, at the top of my list is Clay Hall. I think he did more than just show waffle dominance today. The AFL traits that I think are such a big factor really stood out. He looked untouchable with the ball in his hands and really opened up the ground with all his possessions. So, like I said, unlike other weeks where I demand that he comes into the AFL side, I think this week it's more that I expect he will be selected. So that's kind of me going out on a limb. Number two, the other guy I think who's right on that border is Bailey Williams. It's been obvious that he's been part of a bit of a horses for courses approach in and out of the AFL side as a ruck this year. And the way he was pushed into the forward line for extended periods today, I think it just says to me that the AFL side is really hoping to establish that side of his game so that he can, 1-2 with Flynn in the ruck from full forward. Next most likely for me is probably Brett Bazzo. He looks like he gets a little bit better every week and has been up to the AFL standard for a few weeks now. I probably wouldn't stake any certainty of it, but I do think he's in that zone of eventually getting the call up. So I'm not talking about next week, but he's probably the third man that I'd predict. And then the last one for me, I think, is Malachi Champion, who had one of his better games. He's got some great game sense and skills. And when you're looking at small forwards to select in the AFL each week, it really doesn't hurt to pick a bloke that caught three guys holding the ball, played up the ground cleverly, and still kicked one, which pretty much covers my review for today. As always, thanks you for tuning in. And if you're not already a subscriber to the channel, please consider hitting that button, as it still makes a massive difference in making the work that goes into these videos more sustainable long term. If you do, then I expect I'll probably see you again for my AFL review of a big win over the Kangaroos in Bunbury tomorrow. And until then,